All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me today for Q&A for lesson number 4. And we are going to be taking a look at that lesson today, and it will dial in on a few things, a few important aspects, microclimates and zones. So it's going to be very interesting to review that with you. And we will take a look at some examples as well. I see there's a couple of questions in the Google document, so we're going to look at those as well. So without further ado, I will shift over here and share my screen. There we go. Okay, so yeah, lesson number 4. We're starting to dial deeper into our site analysis. And again, this is one of the huge differences between traditional landscape architecture and permaculture or a regenerative land design approach, where we really take note of the conditions on the site and try and match all of our actions to best suit it. And every site is going to be completely different. And that's the beauty of taking this approach. It's not a cookie cutter approach. And, you get the best value basically from the site and from, if you have clients, from the work you're doing. So let's take a look at what's involved. So there's 2 halves to the assignment. The first half is a microclimate assessment. So there we're really looking at major microclimates within the site. And even if it's a small urban site, you are going to have differences. And it may just be from shade that's being cast from a house, or even fences, neighboring vegetation. There's, could be hard surfaces on the south that gets southern exposure that create a really warm environment around them. There's all kinds of possibilities there. So what we want to do is sort of relate the sun, wind, the moisture, and any other major influences you can think about that might be appropriate to your project site. And we want to choose 5 plants as well. So, and hopefully a 1 tree and 1 shrub. That might not be possible for everybody, but for most people it will be. If you had a project site that was, let's say, a new build, so it had nothing on it, that might be the case. And I believe we have that. I'm trying to remember the student that's got it'll come to me. Anyways, it normally happens where we do have a building site and either a proposed house footprint or a house in place. So again, we want to label our plants. We want to indicate the microclimate designation. So there's some examples here. And again, with your plants, you want to use common names and botanical names that's synonymous with scientific names. Call it what you may, but this, as you go forward, and if you do, get more serious about designing for others, what you'll find is the botanical names are the best way to identify your plant material. And I focused so much on that during the early part of my career, probably for a decade. And because of that, I was not very good with common names. So it was a kind of a funny twist there. But when you go to try and search for plants that you're hoping to use, botanical names are the best. And that way you're getting exactly what you're hoping for. An example would be, say, a rose, right? So as you know, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of different cultivars and species. So if you were hoping just to get a rose, you could get any number of different possibilities with that. Let me see here. So yes, the microclimate, and then we have a SWOT analysis. So some of the elements here that we traditionally want to keep is, that north arrow and a little title block and your name. Also good to put the date on there, just in case you have any revisions. It's a good habit to be in to date it, because I know with the work we do, we often have initial concepts which clients will review and will revise their concept. So having some way of noting the date on it is a really good thing. So every area of the map should have a microclimate designation. So try and keep that in the back of your head. You want to have a key to be able to identify them. And then, of course, your 5 plants you want to identify as well. And there's that microclimate plant ID chart to fill out and an attributes chart. So maybe what we'll do here, and I didn't do that before the class. I thought I had all my ducks in a row, but let's just go to the modules section. And we'll go down to some sample students. All right. These are great to look through. I don't know if anybody's checked them out. But of course, you're looking at everybody, because there is a peer review, you get to look at everybody's work as we're going through this. And believe it or not, for myself, when I used to, at one point in my career, I was a project manager and estimator for commercial landscapes. And I got to see a lot of drawings every week, probably, 5 or 6 that we would decide whether we were going to bid on or not. And it's such a fabulous way of seeing how other people do their graphics and articulate the information that they're trying to get across. Especially in that case, because the drawing has to tell you everything. There's nobody there describing it. So, okay, so let's take a look at this example where we have microclimate map, and you can see that we have some nice graphics here. Pretty much all the areas are covered. I'm not going to get too fussy about these little slivers here, so don't worry about that. If you had better software that was easier to ensure that there was no little blank spots, then obviously that would look better as a presentation piece, but this is just great. And then we have all the microclimates and the plants that listed on the left here. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. So it's really just your base map, and you're doing a layer over that, and we're identifying what kind of spaces we're looking at. And of course, this one here is full sun, it's warm, and it's medium to wet. So those are, that's useful information to add. Besides it being full sun, just what sort of growing conditions you might expect when searching for plants, if you in fact do decide you're going to put plants in that area. The same with all of these spaces here. And this, of course, being a riparian area, so it's got not only sun, but it has some shade, and it generally is cool and moist, right? What you would expect in a riparian area, which is quite a unique spot all on its own. So I think this is pretty straightforward. And then the next sheet, which might be a little different for you guys, because this, let me just see if I can. No. There we go. So there's the master. I'll just take a look and see if this changes ever so slightly each class as we refine it. So there's our first sheet, and yes, in fact, this is our plant ID sheet. So you can see this is a little different than the example I showed you. And here's where we want to put our plants. And this is really useful going through this, where we have our form and the habitat, the microclimate, any uses, ecological function, which is good to think about, as well as a photo. So very much a learning experience going through this. And again, when I started my landscape career, I spent at least 10 years just diving into different plants that we could use and where they were from. Um, really seeing them in books, because that was before the days of the internet, if you can imagine. So I subsequently have this huge library at home. But now there are some good resources online. I prefer books personally, but that, part of my life has kind of fallen away a little bit. I don't really need to focus on individual plants so much anymore. I'm feeling comfortable with that, but this is a huge part of any land design, is just getting to know the material so that when you install it, largely going to have some success. And it is trial and error. And we've had experience where we've put in landscapes that 9 of them will perform really well, and maybe one doesn't. So you have a little bit of troubleshooting there to figure out why, and you're doing your best to guess. The client may not even be aware of it, because our expectations for our landscapes is that they respond very quickly, because we put a lot of time and energy into the preparation. So we have a question here in the chat from Sabrina. Do we need to have one plant per microclimate zone? That would probably be good if you can, if that works out on your site, I would do that. There are going to be a few plants that can drift between them a little bit, but yeah, that's a good question, Sabrina. And yes, I would try and go that direction. Sorry, I'm just going to get back to our example here. There we go. So again, this is a good example shown here. And this is something that we don't provide for our clients. We do something slightly different, and I can show that to you a little bit later if we have time, because we do have a couple other questions. And this is page 2 of that. And then there's a sample of existing plant species, so that is nice to include. And that is definitely something, if you were designing a project site for someone else, you definitely want to take note of significant existing plants, and as you have with your base plans, right? So the attributes is another section that we want to take a look at. And again, this is very interesting to go through. You got a lot of information here that you can reference. And again, an important part of site analysis that is really going to help when you go to not only look at what plants you might put in these places, but also what elements. So if, let's say, yourself or a client wanted a nice, relaxing place to sit, where are the ideal places that would be a good fit. So all sorts of reasons to do that. And then we have a SWOT analysis here, and then any questions you might have. So that is microclimate assessment. There are some resources here, and basically a plant identification chart, not much else. Anybody have any questions about the microclimate assessment? If you do, you can unmute yourself or you can pop a question into the chat. You can, whatever you're comfortable with. And if not, I'll just carry on to the zone map. So let's take a look at that. And that's a very interesting part of the site analysis as well. So really in this section, we're looking at existing zones. So how yourself or your client moves about the site. And it's very interesting to see. We've seen some interesting sites that make a lot of sense, and then there occasionally is an element placed within it that doesn't make sense. An example of that might be, and we've seen this before, a chicken coop, which, that's wonderful, having chickens or any birds, small animals, fantastic. But in this particular case, it was a 3-acre site and the chicken coop was at the very far end of it. So when you realize you have to go there a minimum of twice a day and maybe 3 times a day, I mean, we go and check out our chickens 3 times a day. That's just unnecessarily, I mean, it's nice to get some exercise, but there's also on a homestead some better ways of placing your energy. So often with chicken coops, they'll be right at the edge of a zone 1. I don't think you'd want it within your zone 1, but right outside of it. And that's pretty much where we have ours. I'm trying to think about and the other thing is location. Like I can just turn my head, see my chicken coop, see if they're okay. So I don't necessarily have to go and check on them to see if there's any predator pressure, which we get quite a bit of. And as soon as you do get things like chickens, you end up attracting predators, which for the most part, it's great to see. They're an important part of the ecology, but you don't want to take your chickens unnecessarily or your eggs. So let's see, we're going through 1 through 5. So this is one place that I see people getting a little bit confused. So on an urban site, sometimes I see students thinking, oh, I must have 5 zones here. I better make sure that that is the case. And quite often on an urban location, you may only have 3. You may only have 2. I mean, it really does depend on the size of the property and the usage. Sorry about that. I will just... You would think I would turn that off before, but okay. Yeah, so again, with an urban location, it's just not often the case. And a zone 5, and it may not be really clear with the content. I'm not absolutely sure because I haven't gone through all the course content, the latest of it. But zone 5, in my interpretation, is a zone that is a sort of an untouched area. We'll call it well, it doesn't have to be an old growth forest, but it could be a forested area if that's traditionally what you would find in your area. But something that's not managed at all. You could walk through it perhaps, but you wouldn't be going in and maintaining it other than, some very, very basic stuff. So we have a zone 5 here. We don't manage it at all. If we get trees coming down, which we did have a couple in the last snowstorm, we'll probably go in and we have a nice arbutus or madrona. So we're going to be cutting that up for firewood because that's pretty beautiful wood to burn. but for the most part, we try and leave things as is. And we have some interesting pioneer plants, some red alder that are they're 25-year-old early growth, but they fall over all the time, and that's all part of the soil building process for them. So we don't touch those at all. Emily has a question here. If there is a zone 5 right outside of the property, would we include that? You don't have to. You could certainly, because what we're doing is we're looking at the site itself right now, and that analysis of what you've got and how you travel through that site. So if you did want to include it as out of interest, I would say that is a really good thing to even have on your base map, to include existing vegetation that's outside of the property boundary. So do you have to? No, but feel free if that's what you want to do, for sure. That's that's very helpful information, and uh, a real bonus for that property if you're able to be on the edge of that untouched forested area. So hopefully that helps you out, Emily. Um, yes, yeah, there are. When we do base maps as well, it really does depend on the setting, but we like to include surrounding vegetation, or even um, often on acreage sites, we'll put neighboring homes, because there's, usually a privacy concern, which is part of that sector analysis. And it's good to identify as much as you can without it, getting into an overloaded, or you're zooming out so much that it loses its resolution. So again, good question. And yeah, that's a case where that is pretty key information when you start to look at design elements on your map. So, and let's see here. So we're going to show doors and gateways. Again, you want to have that title block and north arrow. These are just things you'll always want to include on every design sheet you do, because you definitely want to have a clear, for it to be very clear if somebody is looking at it and you're not there to explain it. And then we're looking at pathways. So we do a similar thing, but in a different way with our work. And these pathways we include on what we call an access layer. And here we're looking at footpath, bike, vehicle pathways, and these are all existing. So as we go through into those final steps of the design, where we're going in lesson sort of 8, 9, and 10, you'll probably see that the zones may change a little and the traffic patterns may change, especially if you've identified, particularly in an urban location, where there's a need to optimize more of the property. So so do be aware that this will most likely change a little bit. So just getting back to some of the elements here that we want to include. Every area of the map has to have some sort of zone designation, and it's got to make sense based on the usage of the property and how people travel through it. Has a short explanation with it, and show the pathways and the frequency, and then gates and doorways. And those are obvious. If you have a doorway, uh, that's where probably where your zone 1 is starting. So let's take a look at an example here that we got up, similar to what we just saw. And here we go. Again, we have all of the map covered, and this is again is good enough for the software that's being used here. So zone 1 is right around that hub. And this is acreage. I believe this is a 2-acre, almost 2-acre site. So zone 1 is going to look differently on acreage than it will. Well, let's say a zone 1 on a farm, that looks really different to urban. An urban zone 1, I have seen some of them, at least the current zone 1, prior to any design work, where it's basically the driveway leading up to the doors, and that's their daily, regular traffic pattern through the site. So here there's a pretty big band around the house. Bill Mollison would say that, I believe in the Permaculture Designer's Manual, he talks about a 10-foot swath around the house, and this is much bigger. And I would agree that, I mean, zone 1 on our property is much larger than 10 feet. We don't have everything within 10 feet of our house, that's for sure. We have a little outdoor cooking area, and our we have annual raised beds right off the south side of our house, and then we have larger annual landscape areas that are further away that are kind of a zone 1 seasonally, although we do walk by them every day. So we just typically have a route we take daily. So our zone 1 is actually part of a footpath that goes around our property, even though we're walking beside zone 5 and zone 3 and all of the zones for that matter. So in this case, it's a hub, and then your zone 2 is outside of that. And, you could argue, well, this is a driveway and you're going to be using that daily, potentially daily. We don't, because we're both working out of home at the moment, but certainly in the old days it was, or older days. And then we have zone 3, 4, and 5. So again, 5 being this riparian untouched area, and zone 4 here is a perimeter that's used 2 to 3 times a week. So as you can see, there's a little description, which is super helpful, right? So that's the sort of thing we want to see, your base map with this zone overlay, and a little explanation. Images are helpful, as well as a little bit of a key showing that circulation pattern. And then we have our SWOT analysis. So this is a case where, after you go through the exercise, you might realize, oh my gosh, my zone 1 is enormous, because some people's are, and it may just be, wow, we're trying to do too much in this area. Maybe we should be, rethinking some of the design elements and pull them back closer to the house. You may have a clothesline that's quite a ways from the house. That's an example of an element that would be easy to move that, again, you'd want fairly close. And yeah, so let us take a peek back here. I would definitely make sure you go through the rubric. I know this is something I repeat each meeting, but this is what I use to grade your papers. So as long as you have everything in here, you're good. And then if, as far as those more graphical elements and, just some opinions, those are provided during your feedback that I do for you. But you definitely want to make sure you have the minimum, and that would be this rubric here. So, right. Now, does anybody have any questions about zones? Happy to answer that.
I have a question. So I might have a zone 1 that is by my front porch where I have a rosemary plant and some thyme that I use for cooking. But then I would consider my other zone 1 my back patio deck area. So couldn't it be like split into 2 areas? Because they would be on
Sure.
opposite sides of the house.
Sure. They probably are connected somewhat by, are they connected by doorways? So you kind of go in and out.
Well, yeah, through one's at the front
Yeah.
door.
Yeah. No, that sounds completely, that makes a lot of sense, Sabrina. Funny enough, on where I live, the actual front of our house, we hardly ever use.
Mhm.
It's the main entrance is the rear of the property and the south side, and that's where our hub is. And the front is, I don't know, I would even call it a zone 3 for us. So yeah, it may, everybody's is going to be a little bit different. So that sounds good. Yeah, I don't know if anybody else has anything to say or ask. If not, we can take a look at the Google Doc here. There are a few questions. At least there were prior to the meeting. There we go. So maybe what I'll do, Hannah had a question here that isn't related to today's lesson that we're covering, but happy to go over it. No problem there at all. Oh, Gabriel has a question here. So Gabriel has an imaginary homestead since you have no dwelling on it. Okay. And you're still not sure about the driveway. Is it okay if this changes? Oh, absolutely. Yeah, not to worry there. Everybody's going to have a little different approach. Some people are going to be uncomfortable with changes when my wife and myself are designing, we embrace it, right? My worst nightmare would be creating a design for a client and them to say, oh, that's perfect, right? What I want to hear is how we can fine tune it as we go through the process to match it up best for them. And even during the installation, we're looking at small modifications. Hopefully, you are able to get the big picture nailed on paper before you start breaking ground. But things happen, and sometimes you do have to shift gears. So not to worry. We haven't even talked about, driveways or, I mean, the course can't cover everything, but your access, you probably have a good idea of where the access begins from the road. I'm assuming. I remember your property a little bit. I think you're close to the water and you've got quite a few trees you're concerned with, and you're trying to place your house to minimize the impact. Is that correct, or am I getting you mixed up?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I didn't hear you.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Yeah. So if you want, do you want to, I mean, we could take a look at it right now quickly. Do you want to, are you able to put your document link in the chat and I can open it up? And do you feel comfortable doing that?
Sure, it might take a second or two if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay. Let's see if I can get the document. Where did I have it? Nothing open. I mean, you can continue on and I can add it later, or I don't know if I have to
Yeah.
find.
Well, we have 25 minutes, so no worries. Unless you need unless it's going to take you a little bit of time, then I can. Hannah's question that she has here is going to take a little bit of time to go over, but I'd rather address the pertinent questions first because we can carry over some of her questions onto the next meeting. And it really relates to lesson 5. So
I don't know how to get it into I put it in the chat, or I have to find the link.
yeah,
Right.
Yeah, you can just paste it into the chat and I can open it up here.
Let's see. No, it's not letting me do that.
If not, I can search. Let's see here. I can go back to lesson 3 and look. Here we go.
We found it.
I got it. I'm just going to have to stop share and we'll share that document. All right. So let's just take a look at your base plan, or we can take a look at this. I see. So the entry looks pretty obvious. Hey,
Yes.
that's where you're going to come in. So yes, it does. It does depend where you are placing the house. The driveway is definitely going to be.
I changed the location of the house after talking to a contractor. So it's going to be on the other side, basically opposite of where I had the house now.
So up here?
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. You're going to get better solar aspect. In the winter, you'll be very grateful. And otherwise, you'd have to do a bit of clearing there. And I'm not sure. We'll have to. Is it higher in this area too?
Yeah, it's a gradual slope,
Mhm.
a little bit higher. Yeah.
Right. Well, that sounds like a good idea. So yeah, your driveway may be, fairly obvious, right? So
Yeah.
the what you want to try and do with any driveway, and this is something that Darren Doherty with her agrarian platform really dives into, is trying to keep roads on a similar contour if possible. So if you're, which makes sense, right? If you're going up and down slope, the maintenance of that road is going to go way up over time. We had a road, we have a road coming into our property that was on contour, easy, never needs any work. We've been here 26 years, and so the road would be 40 years old and it's in good shape, never has any issues at all. We built another road to a lower part of our property, so we have 2 entrances, and that goes through a bit of elevation change, and it requires, lots of maintenance. And so if it's avoidable, you do want to make it as direct and easy as possible. And they cost money to build, so every foot you can save within reason is a good idea. I had one client who was on the water with 5 acres, and she had this, it was a beautiful piece of land, it was. And she had this dream of this winding driveway coming down to the house. And we had done a design for her, and at the last minute, she wanted to make a change to accommodate this dream driveway, we'll call it. So we had a 3D model of the site. We can do that with our software. And so we placed a driveway for her. And not only that, she wanted to be able to bring in emergency vehicles that could turn around once down at the front of the house. Which sounds reasonable, but we're talking very large vehicles, right? So we did this, she loved it, and then she went to have it surveyed out, and all the grades were set, and then the civil contractor came in, and it was absolutely insane. They had to move 2,000 cubic yards of material to get the road the way she wanted it. And they didn't actually have to do that. We had proposed a bunch of retaining, but she didn't want to retain. So everything had to be graded back, and it ruined the property, in my opinion. It's a real shame. So you definitely want to be really mindful of your infrastructure and how it impacts the land. And these dreams, so to speak, are not you really want to think through them. How important is a road? She could have tucked the road in, quick and easy, off an existing road, but with this winding theme, as sort of romantic as it sounds, led to extreme cost, and it really had a negative impact on the property. Plus, carving out all this material unearthed a bunch of water flowing. So then drainage reared its head. And yeah, I don't know. I haven't been back there to look at what's happened, but she actually ended up getting upset at me that we weren't basically telling her what she should do. So, which is not what we do. However, I'm very, very careful when we get into that sort of situation now that roads are as direct and make as much sense, easy to look after, and not creating a huge disturbance.
Yeah, I'm thinking of where you have your cursor right now on my site. I'm thinking I might take those 2 trees out, one of them anyway. One of them's a spruce and I don't want to remove it, but the other one's a much smaller tree. And that might be a good location for the driveway, at least, because the house will be up from there, right there. That's what I'm thinking anyway.
Right. Yeah, and I would just allow for, if you're gonna curve here, just allow for a gentle curve so larger trucks can get in. You're going to be building a home, so you're going to have large trucks delivering materials, and you don't want to make it, you want to make it easy. And no doubt what they'll do is rough a road in, and then finish it after construction. That's typically what happens. So,
Right.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Well, we will, I better jump on to these other questions. Does that help you, Gabriel?
Yeah,
At
that's
least.
lots. Yeah.
It sounds like you're getting closer, so that's good to hear.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, we will just switch back. Okay. There we go. Let's take a look at the question. So I'm going to start with Patrick's here. And Patrick had a question about resources for identifying trees and plants. So all plants, I imagine, with a focus on edibles and permaculture. So there are some online websites, absolutely. And the more rich resources are going to require a subscription, absolutely. So a couple of things you could do. Let me see, where was I? No, we're going to get rid of that. If we go ahead to lesson 8, you are going to see a whole bunch of resources here for plants, because when we get into lesson 8, we're really dialing into plant system design. So a couple that stand out that I use, well, I have a library that I guess I don't use a lot of databases anymore. It's in my head, but Plants for the Future, that's one I use a lot. Natural Capital Plant Database is good. I don't use it, and that I think you have free access right now with the course, and maybe you get a discounted access after. I'm not absolutely sure about that, but that would be a very rich resource. And then there's varying degrees of of other databases here. There's so many online resources. You do have to be a little mindful of them because they can be very broad and really not, you know, I occasionally will get, we'll recommend plants for a client, and they'll do some homework on it and they'll come back and say, oh, well, it says it's going to do this and get this big. And it's like, well, you really have to look at where that company or where that person lives and how it responds in that area. Because in the Pacific Northwest, you're going to have a different response than you would say in Eastern North America. So that's the other thing. You do have to locally adjust. Max here has a comment: plants of the Pacific Northwest coast, Foragers Harvest. There's some great resources. Thanks very much for that, Max. Yeah, there's some really good books out there. Botany in a Day. Gabriel uses Picture This app. For my site, is that okay as my source? Sure. Yeah, you can use whatever works for you. And Grace has a question here. The list of native plants changing as climate change continues. Are there a list of native plants? Well, I would say that's really a regional issue. For instance, where I live on Vancouver Island, I'm on the east coast of Vancouver Island, so we're protected. But I know one of our native plants, Western red cedar, or Thuya plicata, is basically getting pushed out. The climate here is getting a little warmer and drier, and it does not like that at all. So we're seeing, you know, even on our property, I think there's probably half a dozen half-dead cedars. So unfortunately, they're getting pushed out. Now, is there a list of those? That would really be regionally based. So I'm not sure. Everything is going to shift, or seems to be. It's a question of whether plants can keep up with the changes that are going on, because their ability to migrate, as you can imagine, pretty slow. They're inhibited by how fast they can spread their seed. I know Douglas fir, the range of Douglas fir is changing dramatically. I've seen some maps of that. And you also have to think, you know, big picture, when we get forest fires coming through an area, what that regrowth is going to look like, right? So what is going to be suited? It's a really deep question. Are there perhaps natives that are struggling? Oh, yeah. Yeah, there are. The big one here where I live is, again, the Western red cedar. And I honestly, trying to think how you could find that out. You may have some local resources. I would even, like, say you're in Portland, for instance, City of Portland may have some information on their website. I haven't really dove into that at all, but there are, you know, there's a lot of info on the web. It's just a question of researching it and trying to guide your way through it. If you're looking at introducing natives, and I think, Grace, you may be even referring to some of the areas you have invasives in your property, and you're trying to, say, remove those and reintroduce. There's going to be some bomb-proof items, and those tend to be right now, you know, say alder and maple and Douglas fir. You know, they're doing well with the changes that we're seeing in a damper area. Not so much Douglas fir, it's very adaptable, but, you know, you're always going to see, I think you're always going to see Ulmus rubra or red alder in and around riparian or wet areas, even if we have a little shift in terms of temperature, because they're so adaptable. Let's see here, we've got a few more questions and comments. So some comments from people on some of the resources. That's great. And thank you, Emily and Sabrina and Joe, for adding those, and Kayla. That's probably something you're way ahead of me on, because again, I'm when I look at using plants within a given landscape, I'm actually looking at nursery availability lists. That's really what it boils down to. What can I get? I made that mistake when when I was an apprentice doing part of our apprenticeship, the school portion of it. When I was doing my, design, I used all kinds of plants I loved, and I got hit down a little bit by my teacher because, there are plants that'd be very difficult to find. And that's the reality of designing and building. You have to be able to get them. So that's often a really good place to start, is the availability lists from a local nursery. What do they carry? I know some of the edible nurseries in my area, they have online availability lists, super helpful. Or they'll have online stores that you can access to see what they carry. And that's really what drives our plant choices within our designs. You may have some wish lists that you want, say, for yourself, that you can kind of search for over time. One was Cranberry maritima, or the sea kale. I was after that for years and finally got it. And that is such a wonderful perennial edible. But yeah, hopefully that helps you out there. Let's go back to the question. So Patrick, hopefully I've answered that for you. Does anybody else have anything they want to ask regarding lesson 4? And if not, we have about 5 minutes left. I can just touch on Hannah's question here. Otherwise, we'll have to push that into our next meeting. So yeah, please don't hesitate if you have anything that you'd like to ask. Okay, well, let's take a look at what Hannah has to say. So she wants to learn more about rainwater harvesting and rain gardens and low impact development. So yeah, that's a course all on its own. And where she lives, in a unique situation, external to the sewage stormwater management. There's no incentives. Yeah. I know where I live, we have to deal with our own septic, sanitary sewer, and our storm. We do have a little bit of storm management in terms of the roadside ditch, but that's about it. So it's a nice place to be because we want to be able to deal with our own they're our own resources, and you could call sewage a resource, really, because you can run a composting toilet system and end up with the resulting in compost. So same with the stormwater management. We have a huge amount of water coming onto our property from a neighboring piece of property that's probably 3 or 4 feet above ours in certain areas. So we have a ditch that takes that and sends it out onto a roadside ditch, and that works fine. But we've kind of tapped into that. Let me just show you a little bit about what we've done. I don't have any drawings of it, although I do have another one. I'll kind of reverse what I was going to do here. we'll stop share and we'll just, we'll show you what, this might be a two-part answer to your question, Hannah, because it is a big topic. So on our property in the fall, we had a pond in this area that was desperately in need of renovation. So we ripped the pond out, and there's a beautiful flagstone patio. We ripped that out. We just started over again, and then we ended up, we want to put a rain garden here. We put a pond elsewhere because we want to have an ecological pond. So we also want to infiltrate our stormwater, and you can see we have sandy, gravelly, it's basically sandy loam. Subsoil is very gravelly, and as we were excavating this, which was quite large, it's about 20 by 30, the basin, the bottom here, and then we had an upper ledge. So this is a little bit different than most rain gardens, because the whole idea of this project was to ensure that we had good stormwater infiltration, but that the plants on that upper ledge, that we are not going to have to irrigate them beyond establishment. So one thing you need, excavator helps in a bigger setting, but you need a laser level because elevations are really important. So we'll just flip through some of the steps here. So we started creating the basin, and we do that by painting out a line and excavate down, and then we set our overflow. So very important, we want to have an overflow, and we're we're looking at a certain pooling height. So we want water in there to pool, and I believe our pooling height's about 10 inches. So you could go anywhere between 6 and 12. And we have about 18 inches of topsoil that we ended up within the bottom here. So there's my wife, Angela. So you can see this second shelf that we built is when we get full pooling height, we get water going sideways into this upper ledge. And that was the whole premise. We want to do that. So of course you want to have your overflow completely level. And then we started routing in some of our stormwater right about where the leveler is here. We put a catch basin. So this was our Achilles heel on the property, was right here was a low point. So all the water came pouring down the road and sat on our driveway, and our roadside, our ditch is on this side, and it's higher than this area. So we had nowhere to put it. So that pipe from the driveway, from the parking area, came down and around, and then we put in a pipe to the roadside ditch that we can control, along with, we dropped in a water line for our irrigation. And then we came up with this idea that we were going to terminate the entry of the supply right here and have it run and then drop into the rain garden. And we subsequently changed that. I didn't like how it turned out. I like the landform. This isn't completed, but I liked what resulted here. It was just maintaining this. I could see not being easy. So that's one of the little catch basins we put in, and we put in another right here too, because we discovered that, and then they both exited, and we kind of armored that with some rock. And then this was the finished product. And then we planted that up. And before we armored this, so you can see the value in armoring the entry of your rain garden. but the water would flow down here, and you know, it works just fine. It's just my concern was maintaining this portion. I could see it being not so good. So we armored this so we wouldn't get any erosion, because once those pipes started flowing, we were getting quite a bit of flow. This is where we put the next catch basin because we had a little collection there, and this is how we did it. We had to uncover existing pipe and chop into it. And then that's basically what we get. That's pretty much full height. So we have a bunch of sedges and some Cornus stolonifera here, some red stem dogwood. And then we have behind it on this shelf, which I don't think is shown in any of these images. We ended up with, we got some elderberry coming, and we have some autumn olive, put some nettle, believe it or not, actually planted nettle in our garden, and some strawberries up over here, and currants, and you know, it's just gonna mainly edible and medicinal, so that's on the edge. And then sedge is, you know, pretty much, there's not many plants that'll take flooding and then drought, so they are very good that way. That's a day where it was flowing pretty good, so we get a lot of flow, and I still haven't, luckily I can control the pipe on the left here, the flow coming out of the ditch. I can turn it off if I want to, because I don't want to overwhelm this too much. Yeah, I don't know if I have any recent images here. No. So let me, I'm just going to go a couple of minutes over here and show you. Let's see here. Okay, I do have something arranged that's got some. Let's see. All right. So here's a little rain garden that we, don't want to leave. Okay. Almost hit the wrong button there. Here we go. So this is a design we did. I won't get into that today, but we ended up designing a little rain garden on a slope. So I have to see things visually for it, A, to see if it'll work, and B, to see how we're going to execute it. And in this case, we carved this out, but we had to retain the top and then a little bit on the bottom here. As well, we ran into a challenge on this site where we hit right at the last inch of depth, we hit some clay. And so what we did was we put in a perforated pipe and a little gravel that we protected with fabric, and then a gate valve, a sliding gate valve. So in the winter, we can open that and release any pressure that's on the rain garden, you know, undue pressure, we'll say. And then in the summer, close it up and really maximize the hydration. And I do have some images I'll show you because it's a smaller scale. There we are. And they're in no particular order. So let's go back. Yeah, here we are just starting, I believe. Now that's the finished product. So you can see we have a bunch of sedge, and then we have some iris and sedge along this zone 2, the sort of fringe of the rain garden. And then this, the whole idea here was that this infiltration was going to benefit these plants downstream, so to speak. So we started with the layout and the excavation, and then we ran into a little challenge here where we, in a previous stage of work, we ran a mainline irrigation line right through here that we had to reroute. which is there. So we found it and pulled it up. And then as you can see, we hit some, pretty clay-like material at the very bottom. So that wasn't ideal. And we're again rectified that with some perforated pipe and a clean out at the very end so that we can clean that out. And here's our main line that we've chopped, and we're going to route in with that pipe. And this is what's called HDPE pipe. So it is, we're not worried about any leaks except where we have a coupler. And there we have a little bit of gravel and fabric so that we're going to get some positive drainage here if needed during the winter time. So the concern was it won't infiltrate as fast as we want it to. So we kind of had to make a change on site. And we're just cleaning up things here, grading, got some soil in place. And this gets chopped down to finish grade when we're all done. And that was the entry. So that comes off the roof of the house as well as behind a retaining wall we built. It's in the back of the garden and spills into the rain garden. And there's another supply on this side for future. There's one more phase of work to do here. That's just after planting. Let's see if I can get trying to find a good after image. Yeah, that's a little better.
Excuse me, could you elaborate a little bit on why the clay was problematic?
Yeah, well, it's great for ponds, right? Couldn't ask for a better material. But the whole premise of the rain garden is infiltrating water into the ground below. And we want that. We don't want water sitting in the rain garden more than 24 hours. So on my property, when we get all that pooling, and that's about 3,000 gallons of water sitting in there, you know, it's gone in hours. It's just incredible how quickly it goes. Now, if we had clay in the bottom of it, it would probably just sit there day after day. It would take a long time. It would be really infiltrating out on a horizontal plane rather than going straight down. So it's more of a safeguard because that little drain and that valve, we can override it. So if we close the valve, then it's not operating and the water is going to behave as is. It's far easier to put in a little safeguard early than it is to identify a problem and have to go back in and fix it. You'd have to rip it all apart and redo it. So yeah, it was a little add-on that was just a wise thing to do. Well, that's what we felt. Let me just see. I had one other picture here. Yeah, I didn't have that many. I've got some nice after photos. I just haven't uncovered those. So yeah, for a later day. Hopefully that has helped Hannah out here. We can dive into that deeper. Maybe in our next call, what we could do is look at rainwater harvesting. And I've got a lot of images I can show you of some projects we did and what we're doing on our property, because we collect about 12,000 gallons of rainwater in cisterns from our roof. And we changed our roof surface over the summer. So we now have a metal roof, which opens up a lot more possibilities for us. we're looking at perhaps, we've been toying with the idea of being able to make that into a potable water source, but it's about a $20,000 venture just for the parts. So I don't know if I'm going to do that. Probably not. But it's always an option if we have to do it. But yeah, we'll get into that in our next call, and can show you some of the, actually I can give you a link here if you want, Hannah, if you want to take a look at a few things that we've done that are on our website that are easy to go through. I'll just put it in the chat box here. There you go. So there are some examples in that case. So that's about our service. I should actually put, there we go. I'm not trying to sell my service by any means, just some easy examples you can take a look at. So by no means all of them, but there are some. And I haven't updated these for a while. I'll have to, been distracted, so I'll have to get to that. Yeah, I don't know if anybody else has any questions today you want to ask, but we have gone over a little bit, so I do apologize. There is so much we can dive into, but next meeting will be very interesting because it's lesson 5 and it's all about water. So we'll really take a closer look at some of the rainwater systems that we've been involved with, as well as what we're doing in our own home. And we're actually putting in what's called a pump chamber that will collect 90% of the water off our roof and send that up to our cisterns. So we already collect an adequate amount for during the winter time. What we want to try and do is when we get those summer rains, we want to grab as much as possible. So if we get an inch of rain, say in August, now we'll have, the ability to collect probably just over 1,000 gallons in that one rain event. So we're hoping to optimize what we're doing, because water is the driving force, and in any landscape, and it's certainly a huge asset that we don't want to waste. So thanks everybody for being part of today's call, and some really good questions, and thanks for all your participation. I hope that it was helpful. And yeah, I really look forward to seeing everybody's assignments. And you all take care and have a great week.